Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Jimmy Tingle Show. We have taken a little bit of a break over the holidays, but we are back. And I am back with an old friend and a fantastic comic who is coming to Boston, the Boston area, March 14th and 15th to the Cabot Theater in beautiful Beverly, Massachusetts. Please welcome the one and only Mr. Gary Gulman.
Thank
How
you,
are you,
Jimmy.
Gary?
It's so great to be back. It's great to see your face, and I'm always happy to see you. You're always a very positive, encouraging friend and mentor.
Well, thank you, Gary. And I have to say, your power of example is just your work, man. What you do and the way you do it, and the work ethic that you've demonstrated over the years, it's incredible. I was just on the website, GaryGulman.com, folks, if you'd like to check out his website. All his tour dates are there. So wherever you are in the country, he's going to be very, very busy in 2024. And he's got a new book out. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his process in comedy. And that's what I love about you, Gary. The work ethic is amazing. And the amount of material that you turn out is, it's just really so impressive. And it's very, very inspiring. So you got me psyched to talk to you today because I know you have a new book out. And I'm so happy to talk to you about your book because I have so many questions. First of all, what was the inspiration for writing the book?
I think that since I've been old enough to really, well, first of all, to read, but also understand the mechanisms of books. I've just been in love with reading and books and admired authors, but there was also a part of me that was in awe of them. And so, but throughout my life, I've always thought this would be interesting in a book. Certain things would happen, events, positive and negative, and I would think this would be a very interesting story for a book. And then after I put out the Great Depresh, which was my last special before this current one that just came out, I was approached by a number of publishers, and they said, do you have a story to tell or a book idea? And there was an idea that I had for a long time, and it was called at the time K through 12, and it was just a memoir of my life from kindergarten through 12th grade. I have an unusual memory for most of my life, but what was unusual was that most people don't remember kindergarten or the first day of first grade or seventh grade or whatever. But for some reason, I have this all these vivid memories of my time there. And so I pitched them that idea, and they were amenable to it and matched me with an editor who I felt would be a good guide, a man who had written his own books and also had edited, among others, a book that Bob Newhart had written. And so I thought, I won't have to do it by myself. This man will be able to point me in the right direction and give me guidance. And so that enabled me to overcome sort of that awe of authors and the fear of failure and things like that. And so it took me over 2 years to do it, closer to 3 years, but I put it together and I got to the point where I would read it and I wouldn't cringe from the writing, which is sort of something that artists or writers and comedians understand, that either reading yourself or watching yourself, you think, oh, I'm so embarrassed, and
Right.
you can literally cringe. And then so that's where it got in the book, and luckily it coincided with about the time we were going to send it to print. And I'm very proud of it, and I think it works, and I've gotten really remarkable feedback from people who were fans of my comedy, but also people who are just discovering me through this book. So I've been really grateful.
Yeah. Well, the name of the book is Misfit. Now, where did that title come from, Gary?
That's one of my favorite questions to answer, because I was originally going to call it K through 12,
Right.
but then I was informed that if you type K through 12 into a search engine, millions of things will come up before your book. There are too many things. It's been out there, this expression, for
Too many
too
grammar
long.
schools.
Yeah, it would be every
It's
grammar
grammar
school
schools all over.
on North America. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the rock band Rush, and they had this wonderful song that came out in 1982, but I probably intersected with it much later than when it originally came out. And there was a line about growing up in the suburbs, and the line was, "Nowhere is the dreamer or the misfit so alone," and it always resonated with me, as a dreamer and a misfit and a lonely person, and I remember how much solace and and sort of comfort that song gave to me, and I felt like this book was intended partially to provide comfort for other people who felt uncomfortable or didn't fit in, and it's most of us. Most of us have been in a position where, for whatever reason, the company we were in, or the school, or the sports team, or the jazz band, or whatever it was, we felt like an outsider or a misfit or a new person, or just uncomfortable. And I wanted to provide some comfort for those types of people, the way that song had made me feel a little bit better. There's just this idea that somebody is saying, "Oh, you're not alone. A lot of us have felt that way, and it's okay to feel that way, and you shouldn't." The main thing is, you shouldn't beat yourself up for feeling uncomfortable, and you don't have to take pride in your not fitting in, but you can. And also, you can feel like you're not a loser or a failure if you don't feel like you're fitting in, and in many cases it's just a matter of time before you do find a community that you fit in. I mean, that was really what I found when I first started doing comedy in 1993 in Boston at Nick's Comedy Stop.
Right.
And I felt, oh, this feels so comfortable. I'm not 100% accepted, but there were guys like you and Don Gavin and Tony V who really embraced me, and were positive and encouraging and complimentary. And it just, and for a kid who grew up watching or going to Nick's Comedy Stop and seeing you guys, or at the Comedy Connection, it was surreal. It was literally a dream come true.
Yeah. When you find your tribe, it's so memorable, and you immerse yourself in it. And that's exactly what happened to me in terms of comedy as well. I mean, the Ding Ho Comedy Club opened up like 2 blocks from where I grew up. Wow. And Lenny Clark was the host of the Wednesday night show, and Barry Cremens was the Wednesday night open mic show. And I went to high school with Lenny. Okay. He was a year ahead of me, but the people that started, the other comics, we were all in our early 20s. So all of a sudden, there's these people coming in, making things up on stage. And I was trying to make stuff. I was doing poems. I tried to play the blues. I mean, I tried different ways of expression, but anyway, I can remember being in the Ding Ho, and like Paula Poundstone, Mike Donovan, Goldthwait, Cremens, Mike McDonald, Lenny, of course, his friends and family. I mean, it was Jack Gallagher, and just all the comics that were just there, all of us just making stuff up in this one place that was like a community. And I got a job there. I became the daytime bartender. I just lived at the place for like 3 years. And my friends were saying, "Ting, when are you going to get out of your comedy cocoon?"
But it's just this idea, this place for somebody, especially us who are either artistic or different or more sensitive, that we feel like we can be ourselves and not ridiculed or insulted or anything. Or sometimes we are ridiculed or insulted, but there's a good naturedness about it, and there's also a great deal of warmth that I felt almost immediately when I started going to open mics in the city.
Yeah. Well, I hear you, and I know a lot of every comic out there is going to identify with that because there's nothing like finding your tribe. So, Gary, so the book Misfit, it took you like almost 3 years to write, but this is what I'm talking about with your work ethic. In that period of time, you also did the Great Depresh, and you also did your newest special.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but your newest special, Born on Third Base, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had put out the Great Depresh by the time I started writing the book. I really, the interest for me writing a book came from the popularity of the Great Depresh. So
Mm-hmm.
the interesting thing was I had a year where I wasn't doing any stand up because of the pandemic, and I was writing the book, so I had a head start and momentum. And then it was just a matter of putting aside 4 hours each morning to work on the book, and then the rest of the day I could do some stand up at night. And unlike when I was first coming up, where I would do 2 3 shows a night, I I was probably doing 6 or 7 shows total per week, so maybe 2 or 3 on a Friday or Saturday or both. And so I had a lot of free time. I mean, the lifestyle of
Yeah.
a comedian is really amenable to writing a book, because you have that free time, and also you're used to writing and thinking and being in your head. So it wasn't a huge adjustment to go from writing stand up to writing a memoir, because a lot of my jokes were personal and autobiographical anyhow. So I will say I did have more discipline than the average person, and certainly the average comedian has. But I just, the other thing was that I really enjoy my work. I enjoy writing sentences and funny sentences and
Mm-hmm.
performing. So it's never been something where it was drudgery, or I didn't look forward to performing it or sharing it or writing. And it wasn't it wasn't all a breeze in writing the book, and that I had to learn how to write in general memoir, and then this particular memoir in specifically. But for the most part, I found it to be an enjoyable way to spend a few hours every day. I know there are some writers who are writing from the moment they wake up until after dinner, and it's something you can build an endurance for and a tolerance for. But I found that I was able to keep up with deadlines with 3 or 4 hours a day. Some days 1 hour, some days 6 hours, but on average 3 to 4 hours each day. And the other thing that I would recommend anybody writing a book is to be really careful about taking one day off, because it becomes that much easier to take that second day off, and that's when you lose your momentum and you have to rebuild your endurance.
Right. And it must have been helpful, like you said, to have somebody that you're answering to. Like you said, you're on a deadline. You're just not in
Yeah,
your own head. Like, I'm going to write a book, and and then you have no one else knows you're writing a book. You're the only one that knows you're doing it, and you
right.
don't have anybody asking you how's it going.
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
I imagine you got some sort of an advance.
I did. I got a very generous
Yeah.
advance, and that keeps you honest. But also, there's this
Right.
thing where you people understand, where most comedians can't really say, "Well, I can't tomorrow because, well, what? You're a comedian. You work at night." But when you're writing a book, you can say, "I need to write tomorrow, so I'm not going to be able to meet you for lunch. I'm not going to be able to go play
Yeah.
basketball," or whatever it is. And that's very helpful, that people you have this legitimate excuse for not dilly-dallying.
Right. And I imagine your discipline as an athlete. Like when I have to do something, I go back to like getting ready for the game. I played sports as well in high school, basketball, and I'm getting ready for the game. So like I'm like stretching, I'm warming up, I'm getting my game face on. And that's how I look at my sets. That's how I look at all my shows. I probably put in an inordinate amount of time doing that. I write out my sets, everything. But anyway, I imagine that, but that for me, that came from sports. That came from, you're going to be out there in front of people. It doesn't matter if you got a hit 2 weeks ago, you need to get a hit tomorrow or whatever the case may be, you know? And the same thing, I imagine. So did that discipline of sports help you in this whole preparation for life in this comedy career? Because you wrote Gulman's Tips as well, which was about writing and just write. Yeah. And I mean, that was an amazing, talk about sharing. That was an amazing piece of work as well. If anybody's interested, Gulman's Tips, you can tell them more about it because it's really helpful no matter what walk of life you're in, whether you're a writer or a comic musician or an accountant, it would really help you.
Oh, I've heard that, and thank you. But 100%, the discipline and the lesson of sports for me was always, and you can get it from a number of different avenues, whether it's art or music or languages. But the lesson was, quickly I learned that if you put in effort, you would get better at this thing. And it was so gratifying to just, when I first started playing basketball, I couldn't dribble behind my back. And then I did it over and over and over again and still couldn't. And then one day you do it and you do it poorly and then you do it a little bit better and it pays off. And that I discovered so quickly. And I had an inkling that would be the case because it worked in my schoolwork and it worked in other things that I've pursued, but it works in comedy. The more time you spend thinking about comedy and writing it down and keeping track and preparing. I mean, that was a great lesson I learned from being a fan of John Wooden, the UCLA coach. He used to say, I think, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So like you do with your sets and your set lists, I do the same exact thing. I am always so prepared, especially when I'm doing a special taping or I did a late night with Seth, which the secret is that even though I wasn't doing stand-up, I was doing a panel, but I also prepared with the producer as to what things I wanted to talk about, and I was prepared, and it relieves you of a lot of doubt and insecurity because and Wooden says this also, is this confidence comes from doing everything you can prepare, and then you let go, and the anxiety frequently lifts when you've done the preparation, and I found that to be the case, and that's the greatest lesson I learned from sports. But there are other avenues if you're not athletically inclined that you can learn that through music or a language or art or there are countless outlets.
Sure. So on the book tour, Gary, my wife and I, Catherine, we saw David Sedaris at Symphony Hall in Boston. And
he's amazing.
He's not a stand-up comic, but he's an amazing writer and he's hilarious. And when we saw him, it made me want to write a book, but also understand that you can be in front of whatever, he had 3,000 people at Symphony Hall, and he's reading and everybody's just paying attention. And when the jokes or the funny parts come, everybody laughs. And when the serious things come, people just, withdraw and absorb it. And it was just so, again, just very, very inspiring. When you're doing your shows, I know all of your shows until May, at least, are the book tour. That's what you're calling it. But is there stand-up involved? Is there reading involved? Have you done any yet? And how is that going to work?
Yeah, I actually, I'll explain it. I don't do any reading from the book for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think anybody does it as well as David Sedaris. The other thing is that I also put out an audio version of the book. And so I feel like if they want to listen to me read the book, they can get that from the audio version. And also my superpower or my main skill is that I'm a stand-up. And so I had a bad experience in the 90s where I bought Jerry Seinfeld's book and I read it and it was expensive to me. And when I read it, it was just his act typed up and bound. And I was very angry. And so I said, over the years, as it became more likely that I would eventually be asked to write a book, I said, I will write a book, but I'm not just typing up my act and I'm not including jokes in there. And I don't want to sell people something they've already heard or read. So I'm going to write a book that isn't my act. But then I realized when I was planning this tour that I didn't want to read from the book and I didn't want to do jokes or stories from the book. And so I had to come up with an entire 90 minutes of material that was based on the time period of the book. So they were stories from my childhood and high school and things like that. But I didn't want the people to read the book and then feel like, oh, he did this the other night. And it wasn't, this is much more specific or interesting or better, or I liked it better when he told it on the stage. I didn't want them to comparing it. I wanted the stage show to be an accompaniment, a complement to the book. And so it would be two separate items. And so that's what you'll see. And some people will say that is really hard, but for whatever reason, I've never been more creative or productive in my comedy. So it wasn't that hard. I had some ideas. I wrote them down. I workshopped them over the summer, probably 20 times. And I put together a very compelling, funny show that has themes and ideas presented in the book, but none of the stories or anecdotes or jokes from the book. And it was a challenge, but I can't imagine doing it any other way. I enjoy watching David Sedaris read from his book. It's a great show. I don't think there's anybody else who can do that well. I like going to meet authors and hear them take questions about the book, but I don't want to hear them read. And for a stand-up comedian to do questions and answers, I think it's a little bit, especially at my level, I'm not a celebrity. I don't have any fancy anecdotes about meeting the president or anything. And so I feel like like I said, my one trick is that I write good jokes.
Mm-hmm. Will you be, obviously there'll be books at the Cabot Theater when people come. The first show's already sold out. I mean, excuse me, the 15th is just about sold out, and there's still tickets for March 14th, folks. So, but they're going very, very fast. Will you be there'll be books there. You'll be signing them after the show?
Yeah, I think I said that if you bring your book, I will sign it. I kind of assumed that everybody who was going to get the book would already have it. So we may have some for sale there that night. I think that's a good question to ask, but to be most prepared, I would bring my book and I'll sign it after the show in a meet and greet, because that's really what I love about going to hear an author speak at a Barnes and Noble or at a library. I love to be able to thank them for the book and meet them and take a picture. And it's like one time I met Ray Bradbury, and I've seen Harlan Coben and met him and other authors. And it's a really special connection that you can make with a reader as an author. And so I really get great amount of joy from that.
Right. Well, Gary, the first one is in what's the Coronet Theater? The Coronet in LA?
Yeah, the Coronet. Yeah, the first of 2024. But I've been touring it since September.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's been going really. It's been so fun, and the people have been so appreciative, and I'm grateful, because you know what it is to have an audience that's your own. that are there
Yeah.
to see you. It's a
Right.
different. You can be yourself more. You can sort of lean into your quirks and your obscure and arcane references,
Right.
and so it's really. I think you were at the show I did in Beverly the last time where I was able to do such specific local geographic humor
Yeah.
about the two malls that we had near our house that were in competition, and the people really appreciated it as long as they were aware of the two malls.
Right. Well, will you be doing a Q&A with this audience? Do you
No,
do
I
any
don't.
Q&A
No, I
during
don't
the
do a
show?
Q&A, but I after the show, I meet the people and I give them more time than I think they're expecting. So if they do have a question, I normally
Hmm.
answer the questions, but the it's I've always found that the comedians who do Q&A seem to be trying to have the audience set them up for jokes that they are familiar with. So I remember seeing Jerry Seinfeld when I was in college, and he said, "Are there any questions?" And people would just yell out when they were asking the questions. They would really just say, "What do you think about socks in the laundry?" And he would do a jokes about socks in the laundry. So
Right.
it was a little bit of a cheat rather than a an honest component.
Yeah. Um, when I was running for president, my show Jimmy Tingle for President, people would I'd open it up to Q&A, like
Oh
a
yeah,
press
yeah, yeah.
conference, and people would say, and they would say, I would get the same questions, many of the same questions every night, because what are you going to ask a satirical presidential candidate? So I
Right,
would
right.
end up giving many of the same answers. And it
Oh
was like,
wow.
shooting fish in a barrel. Who's your Mr. Tingle, President candidate Tingle? Who's your vice president? I said, I've given that a lot of thought, and I've determined after much prayer and meditation, I don't need one. What I do
I love
what I'm
it.
going to do is I'm video recording this event tonight. Heaven forbid something should happen to me. You people watch the tape. You'll know what to do.
That's so good. I
So
love it.
I had many of those nights. But Gary, it's great to see you. I will see you on March 14th. My wife and I will be there, and I can't thank you enough for doing the show today. We're going to be on obviously it'll be on the website jimmytingle.com, but it's also going to be on WOMR down in Provincetown. It'll be running the second week in February down there. And anything we can ever do for you. Anything else you want to tell us, Gab, before you leave?
Oh no, I think I'm good. It's just it's so great to be able to catch up and to be able to see Catherine,
Well,
and I'll see you in March.
all right, great. My final question, though, was it cathartic and was it helpful to do this? Are you glad that you did this project?
Yes, yes, I think it really was helpful, and I would say to anybody, it doesn't matter if anybody ever reads it. It is therapeutic to write down memories and analyze them. And I'm sometimes things that I would dredge up would upset me. And luckily, I have a very good therapist, and I was able to discuss that with him, and we were able to get some perspective and some insight into it. So I think it's a very healthy activity, and I think people think that if they're going to do an art, whether it's painting or writing or memoir or a novel, that it has to be a big success in order for it to be any success. And I think most art is best enjoyed by you on your own or by a close friend or family. It's the act of creation and crafting is an end in itself. And I just hope people won't be deterred from doing something because they don't feel that it's going to be universally embraced, because you have no control
Mm-hmm.
over that. And so even if you just put it in a drawer at the end and never show anyone, it feels terrific.
Gary, you got me excited. I'm spending 4 hours tomorrow morning with the opening chapter.
Well, you got to build up to the 4 hours. Nobody can do it. Just set a timer for an hour and sit there and make some sentences and then build up to it.
I'm starting tomorrow with the 4-minute introduction. I'll start at 4 minutes.
All right, thanks, Jimmy.
4 minutes, 14 minutes, 28 minutes.
Yeah.
Great to see you, Gary.
Amazing.
Congratulations.
Right.
Thank you so much. We'll see you in March.
Thanks,
and
guys.
continue success.